Hi everyone, welcome back. This lecture is just going to be a short overview of high fructose corn syrup versus table sugar. It's meant to complement what you saw in the Connect Chapter 4 with carbohydrates and really delve into what's the difference between these, should I be worried about one versus the other, what does it mean for my diet? So just as a quick recap from what you learned about in the chapter, we can see that sugars are broken into different things. There's things called monosaccharides, disaccharides, there's your starches, you have your fibers. You can learn about all that in the book. What I really want to focus on is monosaccharides versus disaccharides as they play a role in high fructose corn syrup versus table sugar. So remember, monosaccharides means one, so it means it's one saccharide unit. And so as we see here on the PowerPoint, there are three different monosaccharides being shown to you, each individual unit. So we can see glucose on the left, fructose in the middle, and galactose on the right. They all have the same chemical formula, C6H12O6, but the way they're structured, the structural formula is a little bit different. It's what we call a structural isomer in biochemistry. The important thing to keep in mind is glucose is our major player. This guy here on the left, that's actually who we want in the body to utilize for energy. It's called dextrose or blood sugar as well. It's what the body really wants. Sometimes we take in, though, just because of table sugars, etc., this big player here called fructose. Now, fructose, you're saying, oh, there's that word high fructose corn syrup. This isn't that yet. But what we know about fructose is, first of all, it's sweeter than glucose. So it actually gives a sweeter taste than this on the tongue. We also find it in things like honey in high quantities. In fact, honey would be considered a high fructose syrup just because it's basically only fructose. Galactose is something we find in milk, so we find a lot of galactose and glucose in that unit over there. But in any case, fructose and galactose are both converted in the liver to glucose because that's what you want to use in the body. It gets sent out as a complex carbohydrate at times, or in the cells becomes a complex carbohydrate, called glycogen for storage. All those things you learned out in the book. So again, this is monosaccharides, but right here we see these are disaccharides. And the only real difference you see here is that bond. Okay, there's a bond right here. It takes two different units and sticks them together. This is called sucrose. This is otherwise known as table sugar. And we can see table sugar has a glucose molecule bound to a fructose molecule. That's all it is. That's table sugar. It's just this bond right here. So again, you could call this sucrose or table sugar. But you can see in this case, we see there's a 50% ratio of glucose to a 50% ratio or 1-to-1 ratio of fructose. So it's 50% and 50%. So table sugar by itself is a 50-50 ratio of glucose and fructose. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, we could take other disaccharides we see in our diets very commonly. Lactose, this is the guy that we find in milk a lot, glucose and galactose, or even maltose, so glucose plus glucose. So for example, people that like malted beverages or shakes, these call them malts, and we use maltose a lot in brewing to make beers. Well, that's just your maltose. That's glucose and glucose. So two glucose molecules stuck together, really good to get cells like yeast growing things. So why should we care about carbohydrates to begin with? Why do we care about things like monosaccharides and disaccharides? Well, obviously they sweeten our food, but like I mentioned before, glucose, this guy over here, is the major player for supplying energy to the body, specifically to the brain and the central nervous system as well. So the central nervous system and the brain is basically sequestered from the rest of the body, something called the blood-brain barrier. Only certain things can go through that blood-brain barrier. One of those things is glucose. So getting enough glucose in our diets or carbohydrates in our diets is very important. This is very counterintuitive to diets such as the Atkins diet. So the Atkins diet is one of these diets. It goes up every few years, and it's called a low carbohydrate, high protein diet. And the idea here is you're supposed to really shuffle away from using lots of carbohydrates, including glucose in your diet. This, in fact, can be dangerous to do, especially for a long-term thing, because again, glucose is just one of those things that can cross the blood-brain barrier to give energy to your brain. There are a couple other things your body can use, which are these chemicals down here, but these are all called ketones. It's just the type of chemical it is. Your liver can metabolize them, and they can make some from fats, etc. But these really aren't very good for you, and it's not what you want your brain to use for an energy source. In fact, high amounts of ketones in the blood supply, which would happen with something like the ketone diet or the Atkins diet, can lead to something called ketosis. Ketosis looks very, very similar to a diabetes-like syndrome where you don't have enough glucose in the body at any time. So in fact, these types of diets are very dangerous. There's also something called protein sparing. When you don't get enough glucose, protein's also taken and converted over into ketones, so that way you can use them for energy. And again, that process is very dangerous because you want to use proteins to build proteins in the body. So if you're not getting enough carbohydrates and glucose in the body, instead the body may decide to elect to take some of the proteins from muscles, including your heart, from your kidneys, from your liver, many places you have proteins in your body because proteins are in fact part of something called enzymes. So every cell has them. It's going to start taking that away. So you're going to essentially hurt the organism to get the carbohydrate the brain needs and the rest of the body needs to operate. So carbohydrates are extremely important. So now that we've given a little bit of a review as far as what these monosaccharides, disaccharides, and the importance of carbohydrates in our diet are, I wanted to go through sweeteners for a few minutes. So there's two general categories of sweeteners. There's the nutritive sweeteners. Nutritive sweeteners provide calories. And then your non-nutritive or alternative sweeteners, as they're sometimes called in media, these provide no calories. So as we can see here, these are all different types of sweeteners. You'll see this table also in your book in chapter 4. But we can see everything has what's called a relative sweetness. The relative sweetness is always set to sucrose. So sucrose relative sweetness is 1. That's our benchmark. And then we say how sweet is everything compared to that. So we can see, first of all, fructose is sweeter than sucrose. All right. We can see that glucose alone is less sweet than sucrose because remember, sucrose has that one of those fructose subunits as part of it. When we get up to our real alternative sweeteners that don't give any energy, for example, aspartame, saccharin, sucrose, we can see these are extremely sweet. That means we only need to use a very, very small amount of it to get the same sweetness as we would need out of sucrose. That's why a lot of times, if you do use any of those red packets or those blue packets to sweeten, for example, your coffee with, there's only a little bit of powder in there. And you can see the reason for that is it's extremely sweet comparative to sucrose or table sugar. What we do know is that we're adding about 16 teaspoons of sugar to our diet every day, especially if we're adding sugar to things like coffee. If we ingest things such as Coca-Cola or any cola-like product or pops, they're going to add a lot of extra sugar to our diet. And I'm going to break down for you in a few slides what that really looks like. But first, let's have a quick conversation about high fructose corn syrup. So we learned before that table sugar, or sucrose, contains a 50-50 ratio of glucose to fructose. Well, high fructose corn syrup is only slightly different than this. High fructose corn syrup starts out as cornstarch, then they use acids and enzymes to break it down, and you end up with glucose subunits and fructose subunits. Now, when it first starts off, it's an extremely large amount of high fructose corn syrup. We can see it's called a 90, high fructose corn syrup 90. That's a 90-10 ratio, so 90% fructose to 10% glucose. But they can change this concentration before they bring it to the consumer. And the amount that we see in our products, such as, for example, used in baking, or if it's used in Coca-Cola or something like that, is called high fructose corn syrup 55. That is a ratio of 55% fructose to 45% glucose. So that's really not different than table sugar. Remember, table sugar is just a 50-50 ratio. Here we're only talking about a ratio of 55 to 45, or I'm sorry, that should be the other way around, 45% glucose and 55% fructose. So should we really be concerned about that? Is that really a high amount of fructose? Not really. And that's what I'm going to show you in the next slides. What you should really be concerned about more than anything is simply that there's added sugars added to drinks and different food products. But why do they use high fructose corn syrup to begin with then? Well, it's because it's cheaper than sucrose. So we make a lot of corn in this country. It's one of our main products. It's after the Farm Acts in the 1970s that made us to produce a lot of corn because it's subsidized by the government. So it's made high fructose corn syrup much cheaper to produce than regular table sugar. It also has some other properties we like when we're baking. So for example, it doesn't form crystals, so it's got better freezing properties if we want to freeze it down. And we can find it in pretty much everything nowadays they can jam it into, like soft drinks, candies, jams, jellies, fruit products, desserts. Some people are beginning to reverse course on this, and we'll talk about that. What it comes down to a lot of times is that people think, high fructose corn syrup, it got a really bad name. It got demonized in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you see it taken out of a lot of products nowadays. You can see that since that Corn Bill back in the 1970s, we started making more high fructose corn syrup. And there's a big upshot on the amount of people that consume it from the 80s on. But that number is starting to dip. And that number started to dip because people got very concerned about the word high fructose corn syrup without knowing what it meant. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a couple different adverts that came out in the 2000s where basically the corn industry tried to go against this whole idea as far as high fructose corn syrup is a bad thing. So here's the first advert we'll watch. This was called HFCS Party. It was a TV commercial that was out in the early 2000s up until the 2010s, and it was put on by the corn growers of America. So take a look. Okay, so that's the first advert, and that's by they tell you to go to sweetsurprise.com. Sweetsurprise.com doesn't exist anymore. This is an ad by the Corn Refiners Association of America, and they had Sweet Surprise active for a few years, and they realized it wasn't making much of a difference as far as people gaining confidence in high fructose corn syrup. So I'm going to show you another advert that was a response to that by a movie called King Corn. So here's the advert by King Corn. It's their response to that commercial you watched. And remember, what the corn refiners are trying to say is, you don't know anything that's bad about high fructose corn syrup. So if you don't know anything that's bad about it, it must not be bad for you. That's what they were trying to say. So here's how King Corn answered that.
You want a puff? No. No, you love me. I do. Take two. No, it's got tobacco in it. Yeah, and? You know what they say about tobacco. What? That it's an American agricultural product? Helps keep the weight off? And, like table sugar, it's fine in moderation. You only bring one?
I'm Chuck Platt. I'm a retired corn farmer, and I approve this message.
Okay, so this was the response. They're basically saying the same idea. Just because you don't know what's in cigarettes or tobacco or nowadays vape products, which can also be quite dangerous, doesn't mean they're not bad for you. So the high fructose corn syrup, maybe it's not bad for you campaign didn't go very well, and it has caused a dip out of high fructose corn syrup, and companies have started going back to regular table sugar. So I'm going to show you an advert by Snapple called Better Stuff. Okay, so here's a commercial by Snapple called Better Stuff, and afterwards I'll explain what's going on here. It's a kind of funny commercial.
Tasty black tea, real sugar. The best stuff.
Okay, so this is kind of a funny advert. It's always been one of my favorite commercials out there with the Better Stuff. But all the Better Stuff is table sugar. So, Snapple for many years used regular table sugar. They also switched to high fructose corn syrup like a lot of companies to save some money, get more sweetness out of it. But then because general consensus among people, this is the social movement, they moved away from high fructose corn syrup back to table sugar. So they're saying we found better stuff. They just went back to what they had beforehand. All right, they didn't change anything really. So it's kind of interesting, these three commercials and how they play on the ideas high fructose corn syrup versus table sugar, and somehow the idea of table sugar is better for you. So I'm going to meet you back in the PowerPoint slide in a second. And we're back, folks. So, basically the idea here is, high fructose corn syrup versus table sugar. What's the difference? And also, why is fructose been so demonized? So I'm going to show you a slide here. And this is really what happens with fructose in the body, okay? So fructose, in fact, is not very good for you, okay? It has a profound metabolic consequence on the body. Basically, the way it passes through the liver, it has an immediate highway to the blood supply, to the liver, causes lots of problems. Downstream, we can see that it messes with LDL levels, cholesterol levels, it's an atherogenic, so it's plaque forming on arterial walls, causes lots of problems with insulin secretion. So in fact, fructose is not good for you. But keep in mind, all right, the real thing here is moderation. Table sugar is 50% fructose. Okay, table sugar is 50% fructose. So what does that really mean? That means, again, the whole idea as far as even if you're consuming table sugar and added sugar, you're getting a lot of fructose in your body. And even more so, you're getting a lot of glucose. And what you learned in the chapter by now, all right, with the idea of taking in complex carbohydrates, starches, etc., the idea is that you should be slowly releasing sugars over time in your body and not very quickly. But with added sugars, whether it's high fructose corn syrup or table sugar, it's creating a bullet in the body where these added sugars can immediately leave, all right, the small intestine, make their way to the liver, and cause a blood supply upsurge of glucose. And that's a problem. That's actually what leads to type 2 diabetes over time, especially if a lot is taken in moderation, once a day, once a week. Not probably a big deal, but if you're consuming things such as sodas every single day and brownies and all these things that have added sugars in them and simple sugars every day, it's actually quite a big problem. So let's take a look at this. One of the things here is we see by the Mayo Clinic, soda consumption linked to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other health concerns. There should be no question in your mind that the consumption of soda should be a very, very seldom occurrence. We can see here, soda was once considered an occasional treat, but consumption has steadily increased over the last 3 decades. Many Americans drink soda every day. Demand is so great that manufacturers produce enough soda to supply the average man, woman, and child in America with more than 52 gallons each year. That's profound. That's something very serious. Again, soda should be something that maybe is consumed once a month. Really, those are the numbers on that. Some nutritionals say you should never consume these types of products. But because of advertising, because of changes in social norms, it's become a system where people think it's okay to drink a soda every day or a couple sodas every day. Sodas should not be considered water. They should not be considered something where somebody takes it to be refreshing, but that's what the soda industry wants you to think about. Because you have to remember, and this is what it really comes down to, and I think, the chapter does, we talk about this a bit in this class. The idea is, as humans, we're consumers. If I go to Amazon and I buy something off Amazon, I might, want a new tennis racket or, camping gear or something like that. I'm consuming. They want me to buy that product. But we also have to remember that we are consumers of foods, all right? There's a lot of high fructose corn syrup out there. There's a lot of table sugar being made. There's a lot of soda being made. They want you to drink it. They want you to drink it because then you're consuming it. You're buying their product. The same as the tennis racket company is making tennis rackets, and they want you to buy the tennis rackets. The soda company wants you to buy the soda. That's their product. You're the consumer. So you need to walk into this with a bit of education and self-control as far as saying, why am I consuming this? Why is this being sent to me or marketed to me in this way? The same as even Snapple. They want you to consume Snapple, so they're more than happy going from high fructose corn syrup back to regular table sugar. But remember, that's an added simple sugar. It's still not good for you. So we've seen a little bit about this, as far as table sugar itself, is all that sweet? And what I really want you to do now, all right, is you can take a break from this video or watch this video through, but there's another video right underneath this called How It's Made Sugar. The way the high fructose corn syrup is a completely industrialized process, table sugar is the exact same way. So I want you to take some time, go watch the video on table sugar, and in that as well, look at where brown sugar comes from. Some people think that brown sugar is better for you than white sugar. But this isn't the case at all. White sugar, brown sugar, the only difference between them is in the refining process, as you'll see in the video, is centrifugation. It's a process by we spin out the sugar. And what happens when we spin out the sugar, the white sugar crystals stay in the middle of the centrifuge, and on the outside, molasses forms. Okay, so molasses is also a table sugar. But in between the molasses and the white sugar in the middle, the white sugar crystals in the middle, there's brown sugar because that's just white sugar mixed with molasses crystals. That's all it is. So again, it's the exact same thing. It's not any better for you. It's still table sugar. It's just got a little bit of molasses added to it. That's the same as brown sugar or even sugar in the raw. Any of those products that are being marketed, it's really just table sugar. None of those are better for you than the other. The only time this really came into play and people started to consider it was because of white rice versus brown rice. But that's a completely different thing. Brown rice is a little bit better for you because it's got more of the husk. It's got more of those insoluble fibers on it because it's the whole food. Okay, it's the whole rice kernel then. That's very, very different than considering that everything that's just brown in the food industry is then going to be better for you. White sugar versus brown sugar is a good example for you. There's no difference. Not one is better than the other in regards to your health. They're both dangerous for your health. So I want to talk to you guys for a minute about how much sugar we're talking about, especially when we think about things like sodas. So when we think about an 8-ounce container, of Pepsi, which they don't even make anymore, that has 28 grams of sugar. A 12-ounce can, which you sometimes see, will have 42 grams. But the one that we see more often than not, this guy over here, this one, 20-ounce bottle, 70 grams of sugar. Okay, 70 grams. So how much is that? So we're gonna do this calculation for you here in a second. When you say that one 20-ounce bottle of soda contains your maximum recommended sugar intake for 2.6 days. That's a ton. Look at all this sugar here. Okay, so I want you guys to consider something. Here's some sugar packets. Okay, so these sugar packets over here, they're from Domino, and maybe you drink coffee, maybe you put sugar in your coffee. If you do, I would recommend you try to stop because that's just another area where we're adding a lot of sugar to our diet. How many packets do you think would be appropriate to add to coffee? For some people, they might say none is. That's a good answer from a nutritionist standpoint. But maybe 1, 2 packets. Usually when I survey a class, some people say I put in up to 8 packets of sugar. Okay, that's your personal preference. How many packets do you think you would find in a 20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola? Well, we did this as a class, so this is one of my classes one time when we meet in person. I gave them packets of Domino sugar. They got a scale. They weighed out up to the 28 grams that we saw back here. Or I'm sorry, up to, I believe, 70 grams for the 20-ounce container. And what we saw that is that it added up to 27 sugar packets on average. 27 sugar packets. So when somebody consumes a 20-ounce bottle of soda, that's the equivalent of putting 27 sugar packets into it. That's a lot of sugar packets. No one would feel comfortable doing that with a coffee, but that's what's in a soda. So we have to be concerned about that. Here's something else to consider. You know, soda is really the same as candy. Think back to what we saw, all right, with an 8-ounce can of Coca-Cola. It has about 28 grams of sugar. Well, look at all these candy bars, 31 grams, 24 grams, etc. A soda is the same as a sugar bar or a candy bar. It's the exact same thing. There's no way that's different. It really equals this. We can see a 20-ounce cola is the same as eating 3 brownies. So why don't we consider it a dessert or a treat as opposed to a drink? And what it really comes back to, again, is the way that it's advertised towards us, the way advertisers want us to think. When somebody opens up a bottle of Coke and they take a drink, what's the noise you always hear afterwards? You hear that's a refreshing sound, right? So they're trying to make you correlate refreshing like water with soda, when in reality, it's not refreshing, it's not water, it's a candy bar. It's a sugar drink. It's a sugar snack. It's not something that you should be consuming to relieve thirst. It's very different. And unfortunately, juice is just about the same. So we think about things like orange juice, or now they have all those naked juice products on the market that we see a lot. Again, there's a lot of simple sugars in these products. They're not adding sugar in this case. But look at a Coca-Cola, 40 grams of total carbohydrates. Orange juice, 39. Apple juice, 42. Cherry juice, 49. Grape juice, 60 grams. 60 grams of simple sugars in grape juice. So again, this is one of these things that we have to think about. People think that typically consuming juices is good for them. In fact, they're not. What you really want to focus on, again, is the whole food product. Instead of consuming an orange juice, you should eat an orange. Because again, you're going to get the insoluble fibers with that. You're going to get all the area, that white, translucent layer around the wedge of orange itself. You're consuming that. It's also slowing you down. An orange juice that you might get out of a store, it might have 4 oranges in it, but you probably wouldn't consume 4 oranges at once. You might eat 1 orange at a time, or maybe 1.5 or 2 oranges at a time. You wouldn't consume 4 oranges, but that orange juice may contain up to 4. So it's quite different. And we can see here again, there's other types of sweeteners as well. Turbinado raw sugar, we already talked about this idea. These are really just brown sugars. It's just white sugar mixed with a little bit of molasses still. Maple syrup, that's more of a natural product because, again, they're just going to boil it down, but you are left with a lot of simple sugars. Keep in mind that the pancake syrup they sell in stores, when it's only like $3 or $4, that's high fructose corn syrup. That is not maple syrup. Maple syrup, you're not going to get it for less than 12 or 13 bucks usually for a small container. So there's no actual maple syrup unless it says maple syrup on the package. So be careful of that. Honey is, again, a natural simple sugar source. A lot of fructose. That's why it's so sweet. You only need to put a little bit on. But do keep in mind, honey is extremely dangerous for infants, so it's not to be given to children under the age of 2. It can actually lead to botulism because it's different with the chemistry of the stomach of the baby. Here's what the experts say on brown sugar. Sugar is sugar, regardless of color. That's from Kathy Nonis, Director of Obesity and Diabetes Program at New York City's North General Hospital, and then even a pastry chef. It's sugar. That's all it is. Sugar is sugar. So the experts concur. Brown sugar, or sugar in the raw, it's no better for you than regular table white sugar. Exactly the same. Okay, so that leads us to the end of this quick overview as far as what high fructose corn syrup is versus glucose. I now want you to take a little bit of time. In this module, there's a reflection essay. It only has to be about 2 paragraphs in length, but I want you to focus on, is one or the other better? Are they the same? I hope you come to the conclusion they're the same, and they both need to be taken very carefully as part of somebody's diet. And really, I want you also to reflect on what can we do to reduce that intake of added sugars in our diet? Because again, it comes back to the idea this class is about you. I want you to be able to walk away with an informed role as far as what these things are in your life, what differences you can make to make your nutrition better. So thanks for your time, and we'll see you on the next lecture video.